first day, with energy, the sun was barely rising when Olivia Mason stepped out of her small apartment in Brooklyn, nerves fluttering in her stomach and a hopeful spark in her step. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, she navigated the subway's morning crowds with practiced determination.
Good morning, everyone.
Not just because she was punctual, but also because she had waited so long for this chance. Today wasn't just her first official day at Tech, a renowned New York-based software firm. It was the culmination of years of late-night studying, countless interviews, and dreams her family whispered to one another after Sunday dinners. As Olivia entered the towering glass building, she took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh coffee and the metallic tang of elevator doors. Tech's lobby buzzed with energy, a blend of purposeful footsteps, clipped morning greetings, and the subtle whir of laptops opening. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were headed, except for her. She smoothed her hair, rehearsed her introduction, and reminded herself, "You belong here." The orientation began in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. HR representatives welcomed the new recruits, laying out company values like innovation, collaboration, and integrity. Olivia paid close attention, jotting down thoughtful notes, keen to absorb every detail that might help her navigate this new terrain. After orientation, Olivia was assigned to the product development department. Her new manager, Michael Torres, greeted her with a warm smile, a reassuring contrast to the hustle outside. He introduced Olivia to the team, a diverse mix of seasoned engineers, creative designers, and sharp data analysts. Olivia's seat was tucked near the window, sunlight glancing across her desk, a symbolic invitation to new beginnings. Throughout the morning, Olivia absorbed the flow of information, everything from project timelines to office etiquette, even tips for the best lunch spots nearby. Despite the deluge, she remained attentive, asking insightful questions and offering thoughtful comments. Her enthusiasm did not go unnoticed. A few colleagues exchanged impressed glances, and Michael nodded in approval. At lunch, Olivia joined a small group in the staff lounge. She listened more than she spoke, trying to discern the unspoken rules of office culture. The conversation was friendly, sprinkled with inside jokes and anecdotes from previous projects. Sensing a lull, Olivia shared a light-hearted story from her college internship, earning a round of laughter and her first feeling of genuine connection. By afternoon, Olivia was assigned her first minor task, a research summary for an upcoming project meeting. She threw herself into the work, methodically gathering information and organizing her findings. When she submitted her summary before the deadline, Michael praised her initiative, and even a few teammates looked at her with newfound respect. As the workday ended, Olivia checked her calendar, organized her desk, and reviewed her to-do list for the next day. She felt a tired but satisfying sense of accomplishment. On her way out, Michael stopped her to say, "You had an outstanding first day.
Congratulations.
Can't wait to see what you do next." That night, Olivia reflected on the day's small victories. Her first laugh with colleagues, her manager's compliment, and the sense that, despite a whirlwind of new faces and information, she had made a promising start. She knew the days ahead might not be easy, but for now, she allowed herself to feel proud. The energy she brought in the morning was still with her, fueling a quiet hope for the road ahead. Subtle turbulence. The early optimism that had buoyed Olivia through her first day gradually began to shift as she settled into her new role at
Let's stick
Tech.
to your deliverables.
At first, The signs were faint, barely perceptible whispers beneath the surface of the office's vibrant hum. But Olivia, ever perceptive, couldn't help but notice the subtle undercurrents swirling just beyond the reach of the company's polished professionalism. It started with a fleeting glance here, a measured silence there. During morning stand-ups, when Olivia offered ideas or updates, she sometimes detected a brief pause from her colleagues, a split second in which no one quite met her eyes. Michael, her manager, remained supportive, but Olivia realized that not every member of her team shared his warmth. The most pointed chill came from Ms. Carter, a senior supervisor in product development. Ms. Carter moved through the office like a sharp wind, her presence both commanding and, at times, intimidating. She rarely addressed Olivia directly, instead offering only curt nods or perfunctory acknowledgments. In meetings, Ms. Carter's gaze seemed to pass right over Olivia, as if she barely registered. Subtle as it was, the exclusion stung. Olivia would approach group discussions only to find conversations trailing off, replaced by polite smiles or a sudden interest in work emails. One afternoon, in the break room, a group of teammates clustered by the coffee machine abruptly quieted as Olivia approached. The silence was awkward, heavy with a sort of unspoken boundary. Though someone hastily offered her a seat, Olivia felt like an outsider trespassing on sacred ground. Interactions with her peers showed further signs of invisible barriers. On more than one occasion, project files or updates would bypass her inbox altogether. When she politely asked about missing documents, she received vague apologies. Must have been an oversight, but the pattern quietly persisted. Group tasks, which required close collaboration, were inevitably marked by sidelong glances or suggestive whispers just out of earshot. Yet, for all the friction, Olivia refused to retreat into herself. Instead, she watched closely, taking mental notes of the subtle, systemic ways the company's hierarchy played out. She noticed whose voices dominated meetings, who silenced whom with a glance, and how praise or criticism was distributed. As the weeks wore on, Olivia began to see how office politics weren't only about overt power struggles, but about 1,000 nearly invisible signals. Who was included, who was heard, and who was left in the margins. Most of all, she grew attuned to Ms. Carter's quiet authority. Unlike Michael's approachable style, Ms. Carter wielded influence through silence, selective recognition, and a kind of understated gatekeeping. Olivia couldn't pinpoint a single moment of outright hostility, but sensed, in every interaction, that Ms. Carter was evaluating her, measuring her competence, her confidence, and perhaps her willingness to conform. The tension, though still muted, formed a steady background hum to Olivia's every day. She wondered if she was imagining it, if being new simply made her hyper-aware. But the accumulation of small slights left little room for doubt. Alone at her desk, she grappled with a mix of confusion, self-doubt, and a newly awakened determination to prove herself. Not despite the undercurrents, but because of them. Olivia resolved to keep her head high and her work impeccable, pushing herself to rise above the silent tests set before her. She knew, instinctively, that the true challenges of her new role were only beginning to reveal themselves, and that navigating these unseen storms might be as demanding as any technical problem she would face. Office scheming. If, Olivia had hoped that her vigilance alone would shield her from the office's less savory dynamics. She would soon be proven wrong. In the weeks that followed, the subtle chill she once sensed began to coalesce into unmistakable patterns, a web of calculated slights and minor betrayals that seemed meticulously orchestrated. The hostility was never overt. Instead, it was embedded in the everyday rhythms of corporate life, nearly invisible until each incident piled up, cumulative and corrosive. The first real blow arrived on a nondescript Tuesday morning. Olivia opened her inbox to discover a terse email from a senior associate. The message placed blame for a data entry error squarely on her, despite her knowing, for certain, that she hadn't been near the project files in question. Still new and eager not to appear defensive, Olivia responded professionally, offering to help resolve the issue. The explanation fell on indifferent ears. The narrative of her mistake was quietly accepted, leaving a faint smudge on her otherwise clean record. It soon became clear that such setups were no accident. Olivia began noticing a distinct pattern. Late Friday afternoons would bring urgent, last-minute assignments with nearly impossible deadlines. These tasks, often outside her usual scope or expertise, came with the unspoken expectation that she alone would see them through. Sometimes after, others had already left the office for the weekend. Whenever she delivered her work, the acknowledgement was tepid at best. When small gaps were found, they were magnified out of proportion. Behind the thin smiles and polite nods of her colleagues, Olivia discerned alliances forming. Colleagues who whispered together in the break room, but fell silent at her approach, who offered half-hearted help or conveniently forgot to loop her in to important meetings. Key emails regarding project updates or brainstorming sessions occasionally bypassed her inbox. When she would catch the omission and ask for clarification, the response was always the same. "Oh, must have slipped my mind," or "Sorry, I thought someone else had included you." The sense of exclusion was echoed in the way opportunities seemed to slip through her fingers. Olivia noticed her name missing from the roster of a cutting-edge software rollout campaign she'd lobbied to join. Another time, she found herself penciled in as a support member for a team-building presentation, instead of being considered for a lead, despite her prior experience. Whenever these happenings coincided, she recognized the pattern, a coordinated effort to sideline her, to minimize her visibility to upper management, and ensure she wasn't in the running for upcoming recognition or promotions. The architect behind much of this, Olivia suspected, was Ms. Carter. Though Ms. Carter rarely engaged with office gossip, her presence at the center of each incident was hard to ignore. The woman's approval or disapproval was never voiced, but revealed through a shrug, a thin-lipped smile, or a simple lack of intervention. If a colleague disparaged Olivia's efforts in a meeting, Ms. Carter never interjected to redirect or defend. Her silence was sanction enough. Perhaps the cruelest moments, though, came not from Ms. Carter or the overt actions of her peers, but from the collective indifference that followed each episode. The team's unwillingness to acknowledge the unfairness was isolating. Olivia realized that in this environment, survival was as much about diplomacy as it was about diligence. It wasn't enough to perform well. She needed allies and, perhaps, a strategy to counteract the quiet war waged against her. As the chapter closed, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. Continue absorbing these daily bruises in silence, Or start taking note, careful, detailed note, of every instance of unfair treatment. In the soft glow of her office lamp each night, she began journaling her experiences, printing key emails, and documenting timelines. Deep down, she promised herself this would not be the end of her story. The cost of speaking up. Olivia leaned back in her chair, the soft hum of computers doing little to drown out the quickening beat of her pulse. The office was awash in late morning sunlight, glinting off monitors and the polished metal fixtures, a bright contrast to the heaviness pressing on her chest. She had spent half the night devising improvements for the UX on the team's latest software prototype, driven by a determination to deliver real value and perhaps, finally, pierce the invisible wall around her. The team's weekly project meeting was Olivia's opportunity. This was the space, she believed, where ideas mattered more than alliances, and merit could, if only briefly, outshine politics. As everyone gathered around the long oak table, Michael kicked things off in his usual approachable style, then opened the floor for suggestions. Hand trembling slightly, Olivia raised her voice. She introduced her proposal with careful clarity, speaking to gaps she'd noticed in user feedback, and mapping out solutions that balanced efficiency with usability. For a fleeting moment, she saw Michael's eyes brighten, recognition, perhaps, of her dedication. But as quickly as hope flared, it was eclipsed. Before she could finish, another voice, Jeremy, who rarely took risks, cut in sharply. That's interesting, Olivia, Jeremy said, glancing at Ms. Carter. But in reality, don't you think this adds unnecessary complexity? Maybe sticking with the current design is safer for launch. Across the table, heads nodded. Ms. Carter's expression was inscrutable, but her silence was, in its way, decisive. Undeterred, Olivia elaborated, citing concrete user complaints and potential industry advantages. She tried to reframe the conversation, not as an attack on the team's current trajectory, but as an opportunity for growth. Each point, though, was gently dismissed, sidetracked, or simply ignored. Jeremy's dismissal set the tone. Soon, others were echoing his caution, and the discussion shifted away entirely. Olivia watched in dismay as her slides were closed without comment. After the meeting, deflation settled in. She wanted to believe she had simply chosen the wrong moment, or perhaps failed to communicate the idea's value. But as days passed, a bitter truth emerged. Jeremy approached Olivia hesitantly in the break room. "Sorry if I was harsh, he muttered, not quite meeting her eyes. Later, in another meeting, Olivia's exact proposal, nearly verbatim, surfaced again, but this time from Jeremy. He preemptively credited the team's brainstorming sessions for inspiration. This time, Ms. Carter nodded in visible approval. It was a gut punch Olivia hadn't expected. The theft of her idea was galling enough, but worse was the casual acceptance by the team. No one had missed that it was her work, yet no one spoke up. The sycophantic congratulations for Jeremy grated like sandpaper. Olivia forced a tight smile, pride and anger warring inside her. It was not an isolated incident. In subsequent meetings, whenever Olivia contributed a suggestion, subtle interruptions cropped up like clockwork. Sometimes her proposals were brushed aside with polite but vague excuses. "Let's table that for later," or "I'm not sure it aligns with the roadmap," only for key points to reappear, sometimes days later, branded as someone else's. Olivia became hyper-aware of the signals. Averted eyes, stilted pauses, Ms. Carter's habit of letting the conversation move on without her input. The effect was cumulative. Olivia's confidence began to erode. She started second-guessing everything: her word choice, the way she presented data, the tone of her emails. At nights, she lay awake questioning whether she truly belonged, whether she was, in fact, less capable than she had believed. Outside the meeting room, the side effects of her outspokenness became sharper. The urgent, late-day assignments increased, sometimes pushing her to work hours past everyone else. She'd return the next morning to find her contributions marked up with red digital comments, some of them helpful, many of them nitpicking, and a few undoing her work entirely with little explanation. Interactions with Ms. Carter grew colder and more clinical. Olivia's one-on-one check-ins, once casual and open, turned perfunctory. "Let's stick to your deliverables," Ms. Carter would say flatly, steering conversations away from strategy or improvement. Mentorship, if it could ever be called that, had evaporated. Meanwhile, her peers began to distance themselves, afraid, perhaps, of being seen as allies to someone treading dangerous ground. Lunch invitations grew scarce. Hallway conversations paused as she approached. Even her closest confidant, Daniela, seemed apologetic. "I wish I could do more," Daniela whispered one afternoon. "But you know, Carter, people who push don't last long." For a while, the isolation nearly defeated Olivia. Her workload ballooned with menial assignments, rarely involving core projects or anything with executive visibility. Her performance review was rescheduled twice. When it finally arrived, Ms. Carter's feedback was painfully measured. "You're thorough, but sometimes you come across as combative and unwilling to adapt." The meeting ended before Olivia could ask for specifics. Yet Olivia's spirit, though battered, refused to break. Late one evening, hunched over a corner desk, while the rest of the floor sat in darkness, she poured her frustration into a personal file, a growing document where she cataloged incidents, saved copies of emails and chat messages, and noted the dates her ideas were co-opted or her deadlines moved last minute. It was her way of clutching at dignity, refusing to let the slow erosion of her voice become permanent. She also reached outside her team for guidance. At a company networking session, Olivia struck up a conversation with Priya in the HR department, veiling her concerns in generalities. "Sometimes I wonder how to make my voice heard as a new employee." She hoped for a kernel of insight. Priya, perceptive and kind, offered careful advice about navigating corporate hierarchies and corroborating her value through documentation. "It isn't fair," Priya admitted, "but sometimes you have to build your case quietly before you make your move." Empowered by the exchange, Olivia resolved not to abandon her candor or her conviction. She invested more effort in supporting her claims with data, ensuring every contribution was documented and time-stamped. She made quiet overtures to a few trusted team members, hoping to forge alliances with those who seemed less swayed by office politics. While the road ahead was murky, the cost of her honesty was becoming manifest. Isolation, stolen credit, professional roadblocks, the ever-present undertow of self-doubt. Yet Olivia sensed, deep inside, that integrity exacted a price in every workplace, but also, perhaps, that the price came with the chance, however slim, for lasting change. As the chapter closed, Olivia faced a difficult balance. She could bow to the pressure, fall silent, and quietly fade into the background. Or she could keep inching forward, collecting shards of dignity and evidence until she was ready for a reckoning. Her decision at that moment was not final, but determined. She would keep speaking up, even if her voice trembled, and even if it seemed no one wanted to listen, because to stop now would be to surrender not just her ideas, but herself. Unbroken, the days that followed were dark and heavy for Olivia. Gone was the lightness of her first weeks at Ultratech, replaced by a persistent sense of vulnerability that clung to her from the moment she stepped inside the building. Every familiar hallway felt less welcoming, every friendly nod now edged with uncertainty. Yet, even as discouragement pressed in on all sides, something fierce sparked inside Olivia, a stubborn refusal to let herself be driven out or diminished by the environment around her. She began each morning determined not to be defeated, moving with a deliberate confidence, even if it was half-forced, through the front lobby, past the reception desk, and toward her cubicle beside the big glass windows. There, she made a private ritual out of arranging her space, straightening her notebooks, lining up her pens, checking her neatly tabbed file folders. These small acts of order brought her a measure of calm, proof that at least in this corner of chaos, she could exert some control. Olivia also maintained her professional standards. Despite being sidelined on major projects, she handled even the most tedious tasks with meticulous care, answering every email promptly and completing every assignment to the best of her ability. She refrained from giving anything less than her best, not for the sake of her supervisors, but for herself. It was a point of pride. No matter how others treated her, she would not provide them with an easy excuse for disparagement. But survival at Ultratech now required more than skill. It required strategy. Olivia's keen attention to detail, which had always fueled her success as an analyst, shifted from data to people. She became a quiet observer of office dynamics, noting not only what was said, but what was carefully left unsaid. Patterns emerged. Who sat next to whom in meetings, who was routinely consulted on decisions, how information flowed, and where it stopped. Every time she encountered a questionable interaction or was passed over for a task, Olivia documented it meticulously. She kept a locked folder on her personal drive labeled plainly Notes, but its contents were anything but ordinary. Inside were time-stamped screenshots of rude chat messages, forwarded copies of group emails that had excluded her, summaries of passing remarks made in hallways, and even recordings of discrepancies in meeting invitations. She created a spreadsheet, cross-referencing incidents with dates and participants, always clearly noting the facts and avoiding editorializing. A cold, clear record. It wasn't just for her protection. It was also for her sanity. Journaling allowed Olivia to distinguish patterns from coincidence and facts from paranoia. On particularly rough evenings, after yet another accidental omission from the project list or a subtly aggressive comment, she would reread her notes and remind herself, this was real. It wasn't in her head. Her growing file became proof that her experiences weren't imaginary, and that her resolve was grounded in reality, not just emotion. Despite the isolation, Olivia was not entirely without allies. She learned to seek out quieter, more empathetic team members, those who, while not outspoken, treated her with an undercurrent of respect. There was Erin from IT, who always shared crucial updates directly rather than through a chain that might skip her, and Jasmine in marketing, who once slid Olivia a supportive post-it note after a particularly grueling meeting. These small gestures, though infrequent, nourished her sense of belonging, and gave her the courage to keep going. Perhaps most discreetly, Olivia reached out to human resources. She scheduled an informal coffee with Priya, the HR associate she'd met at the networking event. Carefully avoiding direct criticism, Olivia asked nuanced questions about workplace culture and documentation procedures. If someone felt they were being overlooked for projects, what would you recommend? Priya's advice was gentle but clear. Keep clear, factual records. Should a formal complaint arise, it will never be too much documentation, only too little. Emboldened by this guidance, Olivia sharpened her documentation practices and began to subtly advocate for herself. In meetings, she recapped her points in follow-up emails to the team, ensuring a written record of her input. When given vague instructions, she asked clarifying questions in writing. If someone borrowed her idea, she would gently refer back to her earlier communication. As I mentioned in last week's meeting, I think taking this approach could help maximize user engagement. In these subtle ways, she reasserted her presence and her voice, refusing to let her ideas be erased. Olivia also devoted time to her well-being outside of work, recognizing how easily stress from the office could spill over into every aspect of her life. She returned to jogging in Prospect Park, the steady rhythm of her footsteps clearing her mind. Weekends became sacred, set aside for calls with family back in Ohio, good novels, and the occasional yoga class. These moments reminded her of life's broader horizon, that her world was bigger than the walls of Alteratech, and her worth not contingent on her coworkers' approval. Nonetheless, setbacks persisted. One Friday, just as she was preparing to sign off for the weekend, a new urgent task appeared in her inbox with a midnight deadline. Olivia's frustration was real, but instead of venting or commiserating, she forwarded the request back, tagging her supervisor and clearly noting when the request was received and when the file could reasonably be completed. She refused to let herself be set up for an unnecessary failure. Her careful record-keeping and quiet resistance did not escape notice entirely. Once, after a particularly contentious project wrap-up, Michael, her manager, stopped by her desk and remarked, "Not everyone would handle this as professionally as you have, Olivia." Though it was not a rescue, and he remained largely on the sidelines, the small acknowledgement bolstered her confidence. Where she once felt paralyzed by the injustice, Olivia now channeled her energy into preparation. Each slight, each roadblock, each ignored message, all were captured as evidence. She began to view her position like a chess game. If her opponents played in the shadows, she would bring her moves into the light, laying a foundation not just for defense, but for an eventual counterattack. The greatest shift, however, was internal. Olivia's daily battles steeled her, carving away uncertainty and revealing a core of unshakable resolve. She no longer measured her value by the praise or approval of others, but by her ability to withstand adversity with integrity intact. Every day she persisted. Every day she refused to retreat. She proved, to herself, if no one else, that strength was sometimes quiet and stubborn, not loud or visible. As the season changed and New York's unforgiving winter crept in, Olivia remained unbroken. Each morning, as she zipped up her coat and headed out to face another daunting day, she reminded herself, persistence is power. She was determined to keep her head high, to stand tall on the strength of her character, and to keep building her case day after day, never knowing when, but certain that in time the opportunity to reclaim her justice and dignity would come. The climactic incident, the winter sun, was barely visible through the swirling gray clouds. Morning, everything reached a breaking point at Alteratech. Olivia arrived earlier than usual, her breath hanging in the frigid air as she hurried toward the glass tower. She felt a heaviness in her chest, a sense that something was about to shift. Even the lobby, bustling with the hustle of Monday energy, seemed tense, conversations more hurried and glances more furtive. By the time Olivia reached her floor, it was clear an emergency had erupted. As she sidestepped around frazzled teammates, talking in whispered tones, she spotted Michael, her manager, standing near the conference room with a strained expression. A tray of half-drunk coffees, left abandoned on the counter, hinted at a meeting interrupted by crisis. Daniela from QA hurried to Olivia's side, voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see the emails? The Solvix project crashed in production. Customers are furious, and it's all hands on deck." Olivia's heart sank as she pulled out her phone. Dozens of emails lit up the screen, subject lines bristling with urgency. Production failure. Immediate action required. Client demands refund. And chillingly, root cause. Alteratech's Solvix rollout had been the company's headline project for months. Olivia had longed to play a central role, but despite her initial proposals to join the main team, she'd been relegated to routine support duties. Still, the data pipeline she'd built in support of user analytics was linked to the deployment, the kind of tenuous connection some might twist into blame. Within minutes, Michael called the team into an emergency meeting. The room was thick with stress. PowerPoint slides flickered overhead, displaying timelines, error logs, and customer complaint summaries. Ms. Carter presided at one end, as cool and composed as ever, her eyes unreadable above folded hands. "Let's get to the point," she said, her voice slicing through the anxious murmurs. "We need to report to senior leadership by noon. I want root cause, impact assessment, and," she paused meaningfully, "accountability." Jeremy, who had led the integration sequence, was the first to speak. "We tracked the rollback to corrupted analytics data. The pipeline flagged a series of incorrect user metrics, which cascaded into Solvix's adaptive engine and caused the failure." He spoke quickly, not quite looking at Olivia, as if hoping to shed responsibility by pointing to technicalities. Olivia felt a cold wave wash over her as all eyes swung in her direction. She opened her mouth, but Ms. Carter beat her to it. "Olivia, the analytics pipeline is under your oversight, is it not?" Each word was calm, but laden with insinuation. A tense silence lingered. Daniela looked at her apologetically. Michael shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Olivia inhaled slowly, fighting the urge to shrink under the scrutiny. Logic, not panic, steered her response. "I appreciate the urgency," she began, "but I need to clarify. My pipeline supplies buffered data to the integration system, but the flags that triggered the rollback were imposed in a recent patch, one I did not review or deploy." Carefully, she avoided defensiveness, pulling up her meticulously kept documentation. She projected her audit logs, Slack messages, and the change control tickets onto the room's shared screen. Dates and times clearly showed her last approved changes, 3 weeks prior to the failed patch. She pointed to a gap in the code repository where a last-minute modification had been pushed under Jeremy's credentials, outside the agreed review protocols. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the whir of a laptop fan. Michael leaned forward, eyes scanning Olivia's evidence. This matches our audit records, he said, voice more certain with every word. Jeremy, you and the integration team handled the last patch, correct? Jeremy's defense faltered. It was a hotfix. Carter asked us to fast-track it. I thought it was minor. I didn't think... Ms. Carter's eyes narrowed, but her mouth remained firm. Regardless, Olivia's name is still attached to the pipeline. The client expects... Olivia straightened her shoulders. With respect, protocols exist for a reason. I wasn't looped in on this patch. My requests for code review went unanswered. She scrolled to an email from the previous week. Please confirm review and deployment schedule for analytics patch. The request had received no reply. Tension thickened. Daniela, emboldened, spoke up. She's right. Integration skipped QA as well. I flagged it but was told to trust the senior engineers. We have records. A beat passed. Then Jasmine from marketing, a usually quiet observer, added, There's documentation here. And client emails support Olivia's timeline. Michael, catching the shift, looked between Ms. Carter and Jeremy. Let's hold off on attributing blame. We need an accurate incident report for leadership. If due process wasn't followed, that's a separate risk. The hours that followed were grueling. Olivia was tasked with tracing log files, clarifying her role in the deployment, and collating every written record of her involvement. Meanwhile, the blame game rippled beneath the surface as tempers flared. Ms. Carter drifted in and out of meetings, occasionally issuing clipped instructions that betrayed a crack in her stoic composure. Despite the mounting stress, Olivia's diligent note-taking paid off. Her records, cross-referenced against IT's system logs, revealed not only that she had followed every applicable protocol, but that a trail of shortcuts had been taken under direct instruction from Ms. Carter. Subtle, but damning, afternoon shadows stretched long across Olivia's desk as senior management descended for a high-stakes meeting. The air was electric with anticipation. The whole project team summoned, along with HR and legal observers. This was the moment Olivia had been bracing for, ever since she first began documenting injustices, never truly knowing if her efforts would matter. She presented her evidence with calm precision, step-by-step emails, help desk tickets, annotated screenshots, process memos. Her documentation painted not just a defense, but a story of integrity. For every shortcut and pressure tactic that had backfired, she had countered with due diligence and professionalism. Senior leadership listened intently. As Olivia finished, Michael spoke up in her support, noting her transparency, the completeness of her audit trail, and her repeated efforts to raise process concerns. Daniela and Jasmine both echoed their support. Even Aaron from IT submitted a written statement, confirming discrepancies in code deployment. When the meeting adjourned, Ms. Carter's veneer had all but slipped, her responses reduced to guarded formalities. Jeremy slumped in his chair, the cost of misplaced blame etched on his features. Later that evening, as dusk fell across the city, Olivia sat quietly at her desk, exhausted, but oddly lighter. She overlaid her last spreadsheet onto the company drive and looked out at the city lights flickering to life. She knew the storm wasn't over. Senior leadership still had questions. HR would be launching a full investigation, and the truth would take time to surface fully. But for the first time since joining Ultratech, Olivia felt her own power, not the power to dominate or retaliate, but to endure, to stand tall, and to demand fairness. That night, she allowed herself a rare indulgence, joy, Joy at having held her line. Joy, even, at the glimmers of solidarity she'd found in colleagues who had quietly watched and decided, when it mattered, not to stay silent. And, as the city's glow bled into her apartment window, Olivia understood something fundamental. She had survived the breaking point, not just by refusing to bend, but by living, every day, with unwavering truth. Unmasking the days after the Solvix crisis were unlike anything Olivia had experienced at Alteratech, where tension had once lurked just below the polished surface. It now buzzed openly in every interaction. Whispers trailed through the corridors. Glances lingered and then darted away. The company's normal hush of productivity was now punctuated by the click and hum of private meetings, the subdued shuffle of HR personnel moving purposefully from office to office, and an unspoken question hanging in the air. What happens next? Olivia felt the spotlight intensify. Not the spotlight of acclaim, but one of scrutiny and delicate inquiry. For months, she'd kept careful notes, preserved every piece of correspondence, saved each screenshot, and logged every suspicious omission or questionable instruction. Now, with the company on the brink of public embarrassment and senior management alert to the possibility of larger issues, her archive became vital. It began quietly, with Olivia requesting a confidential meeting with Human Resources and the Executive Oversight Committee. She took care that had become almost reflexive, not to sound accusatory, simply factual. I have some records I believe are relevant, she said. If Alteratech wants a full picture of what led to the Solvix failure, it may help to review these. Her voice was steady, though a tiny tremor pulsed in her wrist as she handed over the drive and sat down across from Priya and the ethics officer.
Hello.
What followed was a week that seemed both rushed and endless, as if time twisted itself around every new revelation. HR initiated an internal investigation, quietly reaching out to witnesses and collecting related communications. Olivia, for her part, was asked to recount the sequence of events, with special emphasis on her interactions with the integration and product teams, and especially Ms. Carter and Jeremy. The committee's questions were thorough but professional. Olivia described the sudden assignments, deliberately impossible deadlines, and lack of proper code reviews. She spoke of meetings where her contributions would be subtly redirected or appropriated. She pointed out the pattern, how urgent changes were always routed around QA and documentation, with Ms. Carter's tacit approval cloaked in plausible deniability. HR contacted other team members one by one, sometimes together, sometimes apart, intent on piecing together the full puzzle. Some conversations were brief, with colleagues repeating the familiar lines. I thought Olivia was included. Others, especially those with Aaron and Jasmine, took longer. Jasmine, once quiet and reserved, decided enough was enough. She's telling the truth, Jasmine responded one afternoon, her voice breaking the unspoken oath of silence. We all saw it, but nobody wanted to make trouble. Olivia was set up to fail, and we all enabled it by looking away. Daniela's contributions were pivotal. She provided email threads and QA reports she had held back out of fear, showing how QA warnings were routinely dismissed on Carter's orders, exposing an entrenched culture of covering for the inner circle. Each new document strengthened a chain of evidence that was impossible to ignore. A week later, HR called Olivia back for a second, larger meeting. Her heart pounded as she entered the glass-walled conference room and found not just Priya, but the chief people officer and a representative from legal affairs waiting. She steeled herself for defensiveness. But the mood was even, almost gentle. "Thank you for your meticulous documentation, Olivia," the CPO began. "We've examined your case and corroborated your account from multiple sources. It's clear significant breaches of conduct have occurred, and the ramifications go well beyond a single project." Relief mingled with exhaustion, and Olivia blinked rapidly to hold back tears. For the first time since her ordeal began, someone in leadership acknowledged not just the technical facts, but the toll it had taken. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "We're proceeding with formal disciplinary actions," the legal officer explained. "Ms. Carter has been placed on administrative leave while we review her role in process bypassing, workplace culture violations, and failure to provide equitable opportunities. Jeremy and a number of other team leads are also under investigation for collusion, hostile conduct, and misrepresentation of their work. We will also be reviewing the performance of the entire department and offering support for team members affected by these events." Word spread quickly, both through official emails and the office grapevine. The real surprise was how many people responded to the investigation with relief rather than resistance. Employees who had been quiet or wary now found the courage to add their stories, sharing examples of similar conduct going back years. Some stories named other managers with a similar modus operandi. Others simply expressed gratitude that someone had finally stood up, had finally found a way to unmask the untouchables of Alteratech. Olivia felt an odd sense of camaraderie blossom where there had previously been a void. People who had never previously acknowledged her in the hallway now stopped to offer a quiet "thank you" or to nod in solidarity. Daniela, no longer just a secret confidant, now walked with her to lunch. Aaron Initi, once risk-averse, emailed Olivia to say, "If you ever need data dug up, let me know. I'm done protecting people who cut corners." The company instituted new safeguards almost immediately. Anonymous reporting hotlines, stricter change management regulations, and regular ethics workshops were quickly introduced. Senior management, aware of the optics, issued a company-wide memo praising the bravery of those who refused to be complicit in dysfunction and brought long-standing concerns to light. Olivia's name was not mentioned, but everyone in her department knew exactly what had changed and why. Still, the experience was not without bittersweet moments. Some of her former detractors maintained their distance or spread rumors that Olivia was out for blood or trying to make a name for herself through grievances. She felt the ache of those rumors sharply. They grated against her nature and values. But she was learning that speaking out, even for the right reasons, always carried the risk of being misunderstood. Yet, as disciplinary hearings unfolded, more and more staff members rallied to her side, inspired by her resilience and unwillingness to let manipulation prevail. Olivia received an invitation to a private meeting with the CEO and the Chief People Officer, a gesture never extended lightly. In that meeting, the CEO acknowledged both the damage done and Olivia's pivotal role in unraveling it. It's not just about holding individuals accountable, it's about culture. And you, Olivia, have reminded all of us that integrity matters more than comfort, the CEO said sincerely. That night, Olivia stood looking out over Brooklyn from her apartment window, a mug of steaming tea in her hand, the city a bed of scattered lights below. She was tired, changed, perhaps, by the ordeal. But beneath the fatigue, she felt a kind of weightless certainty that every painful step in this saga had meant something. The masks had finally been lifted, not just for Ms. Carter and her circle, but for the silent, complicit dynamics of a whole corporate structure. What Olivia didn't know, but what would become clear in the weeks that followed, was that her courage would become a turning point, a story shared between departments and on hiring panels. She had made it harder for old games to be played in the shadows. She had shown, unambiguously, that even in a city of millions and a company of thousands, the voice of one clear-eyed, determined person could reshape the world around her. Justice revealed for days after the internal investigation at Ultratech concluded. An electric tension hung in the air. Employees arrived at their desks earlier and left later, as if fearing any small misstep might draw unwanted attention. The entire company waited on edge for the results, some out of anxiety, others out of hope that the veil of injustice that had long colored their workplace would finally be lifted. Olivia herself lived in a state of limbo. Even after submitting mountains of evidence and fielding countless interviews, she felt both exposed and invisible. Her supporters checked in with nervous texts and quick, sympathetic glances. Opponents avoided her altogether or eyed her coldly, as if she were a threat, not just to individuals, but to the old, accepted order. When the emails finally landed in inboxes on a chilly Thursday morning, the response was immediate and profound. Subject lines read, "Conclusion of internal review, action items and next steps." For once, nobody pretended business as usual. Whispered conversations broke out at coffee machines and in quiet corners of the office. The company's leadership began with an official memo that was, for once, both candid and unambiguous. Senior management expressed regret for the culture of negligence and partiality that had been allowed to thrive in several departments. Without naming names, they referenced clear violations of corporate ethics, breakdowns in managerial oversight, and retaliation against those who voiced concerns. More importantly, they acknowledged the deep impact this culture had on employee well-being and innovation. Almost immediately, word began to spread about the consequences. One by one, the individuals who had orchestrated or enabled the toxic environment were called into HR. Ms. Carter, whose silent manipulations and strategic omissions had gone unchecked for years, was publicly terminated for misconduct, process breaches, and the failure to act in good faith as a leader. Jeremy was placed on indefinite suspension, pending further legal review, and several other team leads received formal warnings or demotions for their roles in collusion and retaliation. But justice at Ultratech was not only retributive, it was restorative. The executive team made a point of inviting employees to confidential listening sessions, encouraging an honest reckoning with what had happened and asking for input on how to repair trust. New oversight structures were fast-tracked. Independent ethics officers, transparent reporting processes, and a clear policy outlining zero tolerance for retaliation. Anonymous surveys went out. Trainings were overhauled to emphasize respect, psychological safety, and healthy feedback. For Olivia, these measures were more than symbolic. She received a personal visit from the Chief People Officer and Priya from HR. Sitting in a small glass-walled conference room, they thanked her for her bravery, acknowledged the pain she had suffered, and admitted, without equivocation, that the company's future depended on voices like hers being able to speak safely. "We owe you not only an apology," the chief people officer said solemnly, "but a commitment. You showed us where we were failing. Now we have to earn back your trust and the trust of all employees." While these words brought Olivia a sense of relief, the process of healing was far from instantaneous. In the days that followed, she cycled through exhaustion, vindication, and an unexpected sadness. The simple acts of telling the truth, standing her ground, and refusing to enable mistreatment had transformed her role at Alteratech and, to a degree, herself. There was no easy return to normal. As word of disciplinary actions became official, cracks appeared in the once impenetrable cliques within the organization. Some who had kept silent now came forward, offering Olivia private apologies or timid acknowledgments. Others, especially those who had benefited most under the old regime, kept their distance, wary now of her resolve as much as the new company policies. Yet, Olivia noticed a quiet groundswell of positive change. People who had seemed perpetually resigned began to ask questions in meetings, and middle managers became more inclusive and transparent. Team collaboration felt less like a minefield. Employees spoke openly about lessons learned from the crisis. Olivia herself was interviewed by a cross-functional committee charged with redesigning the company's onboarding and mentorship systems to ensure no one else would face her ordeal again. One afternoon, Olivia received a handwritten card from Jasmine. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You changed how we all see what's possible here. Thank you for reminding us what right looks like." That message, more than any policy or official recognition, touched Olivia deeply. She realized the scope of her actions reached far beyond herself. As the weeks unfolded, Alteratech shifted. The company published a transparency report detailing their investigation, disciplinary outcomes, and plans for sustaining accountability. Leadership held forums, not just for damage control, but to invite grassroots participation in rebuilding trust. For the first time in her career, Olivia heard executives say things like, "We can only improve when we listen, even, or especially, when that's uncomfortable." Still, justice had its complications. There was whispered pushback from former power brokers who felt the consequences were too severe, and a subtle wariness from new managers afraid of repeating old mistakes. But a momentum had built that seemed, for now, irreversible. Olivia's professional life changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Far from being ostracized, she was now sought out for her perspective. Former skeptics stopped her in hallways to ask for insight. She found herself mentoring colleagues facing microaggressions or new ethical dilemmas. The HR department began consultations with her about further policy reforms. Yet, throughout all this, Olivia never lost sight of the cost. Justice required energy, unshakable patience, and a willingness to be misunderstood. The scars of the ordeal were real. The friendships that hadn't survived, the promotions delayed, the trust that would take time to rebuild. But she remained unwavering in her conviction that truth-telling, though difficult, was a source of strength, not shame. One evening, long after most desks had emptied out, Olivia stood at her window in the tower, watching the city below glow under new lights. There was no dramatic music or sweeping sense of closure, just a quiet certainty that she had endured changed things, and found her place. In the private shelter of hard-won justice, she realized what had once been her survival story might now serve as someone else's beginning. For justice, Olivia understood, was not only about punishing the guilty or protecting the vulnerable. It was about setting a precedent, opening a window where there had only been a wall, and laying the foundation for a culture where truth could finally breathe. Recognition earned in the months following the crisis at Alteratech, the office that once pulsed with silent tension now felt transformed, subtle at first, but unmistakably different. There was a new air of openness in meeting rooms, a cautious but real sense of possibility in the way people greeted each other in the halls. It took time, patience, and more than a few setbacks. But Olivia Mason found herself standing at the heart of that change. Recognition, when it finally came, arrived not in a single sweeping gesture, but as a mosaic of moments, each one hard-earned and richly nuanced. Alteratech was determined to correct its course, and as part of that journey, the leadership made moves to acknowledge those who had been key to the company's transformation. Olivia's first sign that things were truly shifting came during a quarterly all-hands meeting. The CEO, Mr. Lin, addressed employees from a platform set up in the open atrium, sunlight streaming in behind him. Months earlier, Olivia might have blended quietly into the crowd, unseen. But when the CCEO began to speak of resilience, transparency, and the courage to drive change from within, Olivia saw many eyes turn discreetly her way. "We are here today," Mr. Lin declared, "because some among us refused to accept the easy path. Because people were willing to speak out, to document, to care about this company enough to demand better. They have made us, and will continue to make us, stronger." Olivia's name was not spoken outright, but she felt the nod in her direction. She felt it again in the wave of applause that seemed to wash through her, unbidden and genuine. It was as though the entire company, in that instant, was willing her to claim space, to be visible, even if just for a heartbeat. A few days later, Olivia received an email from the executive assistant to the chief people officer. "Would you be able to join us for a meeting to discuss your future at Alteratech?" She hesitated only a moment before accepting. The meeting that followed was unlike any she'd experienced before. No curt evaluations, no vague platitudes, but real, actionable feedback. Priya from HR, now a trusted ally, smiled widely across the table. "Olivia, we want to thank you again for your integrity and perseverance. Not only did you help us address specific wrongs, but you set a standard we want to see replicated across Alteratech," Priya said. "We've been reviewing your skills, your impact, and the impressive professionalism you've shown under pressure." There was a brief, exciting pause. "We'd like to offer you the role of Senior Product Analyst, and, perhaps more importantly, an opportunity to lead a cross-departmental project focusing on ethical innovation and inclusion." At first, Olivia could barely speak. A promotion, yes, but more than that, a direct invitation to shape the next chapter of the company itself. Pride blossomed slowly but surely, accompanied by an undercurrent of relief. She accepted, expressing gratitude, but also making a quiet promise to herself that she would honor the responsibility such recognition carried. News of Olivia's new role spread quickly, and with it came a flurry of support. Jasmine from marketing was the first to stop by her desk. "You earned this. You really did," she whispered, giving Olivia a congratulatory squeeze on the arm. Aaron from IT sent a playful message. "See? Persistence does pay off. Let me know if you need data wrangled for your new team." Even Daniela, who had walked with Olivia through glum days, surprised her with a bouquet of yellow tulips and a note. "This is just the start." But the greatest affirmation came from her new responsibilities themselves. Olivia was tasked with heading up the company's first cross-functional task force on workplace equity and transparency. She worked closely with teams in R&D, human resources, marketing, and operations, weaving together insights from each. Leading meetings, Olivia leaned on the strengths she had honed during her most difficult months, listening, documenting, inviting tough questions, and resisting easy answers. Her leadership style stood in sharp contrast to what had come before. She made a point of hearing from quieter voices, checking in with junior staff after meetings, and putting credit where it was due. If someone contributed a breakthrough idea in a brainstorming session, Olivia referenced it by name in follow-up emails. When deadlines grew tense, she made sure the reason for the rush was clearly communicated, and that recognition for extra effort was public and specific. The impact was immediate. Teams reported feeling safer to bring up irregularities or suggest new processes. A junior engineer confided to Olivia that, for the first time, she believed her work would be evaluated on merit, not connections. A survey sent out by HR 6 weeks after the formation of Olivia's task force noted a marked increase in morale and a significant drop in anonymous reports of retaliation or exclusion. Though Olivia welcomed praise, she also learned to navigate its complications. Not everyone in the company was ready to celebrate her ascension. A few, still loyal to the old guard, muttered about grandstanding or overcorrections. Olivia took these comments in stride, realizing that true change was never universally popular or immediately accepted. The difference now, she thought, was that she was no longer alone. Others, emboldened by her example, began to step forward, some with their own stories, some with new solutions. The most meaningful sign of recognition for Olivia came in small moments. A knock on her door from a colleague needing advice, a tentative suggestion in a meeting, spoken with more confidence, a simple thank you note, left anonymously on her desk, expressing hope for the future. Through all of this, Olivia remained grounded in the lessons she had absorbed during her struggle. She still kept detailed notes, not out of suspicion, but as a matter of principle. She still jogged through Prospect Park, each evening run a meditation on obstacles faced and overcome. She found herself less eager for validation and more focused on outcomes. Systems improved, voices heard, paths cleared for those who came after. One Friday afternoon, as she wrapped up a week of meetings and strategy sessions, Olivia paused at the window of her new office, watching as the city's lights bloomed against the dusk. She remembered the nights when she'd walked home with hunched shoulders, uncertain if she would even stay at the company. Now, she saw her own reflection in the glass, standing straight and certain. Recognition, she realized, was not about applause or titles. It was about being trusted to make a difference, about changing not just policies, but the lived reality of a place. And in that, she had finally found what she'd sought all along, a sense of belonging defined not by approval, but by the lasting marks she helped leave on the world around her. A new light in the office. Spring swept into New York with clean winds and nascent green, breathing renewal into the city and, in its own quiet way, into Alteratech, where once the office had felt like an arena of silent competition and heavily guarded secrets. Now shafts of sunlight spilled through the lobby's glass facades each morning, warming the chilled corners that had lingered in the aftermath of chaos. Olivia Mason noticed the shift not in grand gestures, but in subtle details. Conversation in the kitchen flowed easily again. Laughter, hesitant at first, then genuine, had become a regular guest during lunchtime. Desks, once segregated by invisible boundaries, now saw people from different teams, conferring, troubleshooting, or simply sharing in small talk about last night's rain or the newest bagel place. The air felt less tense, more breathable. For Olivia, the change was not just atmospheric, it was deeply personal. After months navigating unspeakable pressure and standing her ground through storms, she felt transformed, not simply by what she had survived, but by the knowledge that she had become a quiet catalyst for this new beginning. Yet, hero was never the label she sought. She made her peace with the fact that much of what she had done would never be visible to most of her colleagues. Instead, she was content to be part of a movement that, though sparked by her actions, now lived in the everyday choices her co-workers made. Her new office was less of an upgrade in size or view and more of a symbol, a place from which she could foster the openness that had been missing before. On her first day as senior product analyst and lead of the ethics task force, Olivia had arranged 2 comfortable chairs near the window, an unobtrusive invitation for anyone who wished to stop by. Where other managers kept their doors shut, hers remained open as often as possible. Gradually, people began dropping in, not only junior employees seeking advice, but also longtime managers hoping to recalibrate their approach to their teams. As the weeks unfurled, Olivia dove into her cross-departmental work with the same calm meticulousness that had carried her through the hardest times. The Ethical Innovation Task Force she now led included representatives from HR, product, engineering, and even the sales division, a group that might once have been riven by suspicion or apathy, but now greeted each agenda with surprising energy. Together, they untangled issues as diverse as transparent performance reviews, conflict, resolution protocols, and systems to elevate underutilized talent. From the outset, Olivia championed transparency and psychological safety. She instituted voice rounds in every major meeting, ensuring everyone, especially the more introverted team members, could contribute without fear of dismissal. She invited constructive criticism of her own ideas, unfazed by dissent. This wasn't just a supervisory trick. It was a philosophy, one that communicated, "I am not afraid of the hard truth, and you shouldn't be either." Early on, there were missteps. An initiative for an anonymous suggestion portal for workplace issues was initially skewed by a flood of off-topic submissions and a few mean-spirited posts, a reflection, perhaps, of pent-up tension. Olivia and her task force addressed it candidly with the entire company, discussing not just the problems with online anonymity, but the difficulty of building trust where wounds were still fresh. "We won't fix these things overnight," Olivia told the room, "but we will keep working on them. This is everyone's office to improve." Such honesty, simple, but so long absent, became quietly contagious. Other departments adopted elements from Olivia's approach, HR replaced convoluted complaint forms with straightforward, well-explained channels. Engineering piloted failure retrospectives, not to assign blame, but to learn and grow. Middle managers began scheduling regular check-ins centered not on quotas, but on developmental goals and personal well-being. Still, change was neither automatic nor universal. Some members of the old guard remained wary, their skepticism showing in the clipped tone of emails or in the way they hung back from new projects. Olivia, however, did not attempt to push anyone into enthusiasm. She knew from experience that transformation is cumulative, a sum of tiny, persistent acts. And so she continued, one conversation at a time, to demonstrate what real inclusion, fairness, and courage could look like. As spring edged into summer, Olivia's days regained equilibrium. She carved out mornings for focus work, reviewing workflows, proposing policy improvements, or mentoring the next wave of analysts. Afternoons thrummed with collaboration and small group sessions. Each evening, she laced up her sneakers for a run in Prospect Park. The rhythm of her strides mapped the distance she had come, from isolation and quiet hurt to a place of shared passion, impact, and hope. The team's progress was measured not only in policies implemented, but in personal testimonies. A designer who had once hesitated to voice ideas in meetings now volunteered to spearhead a major product presentation. Two software engineers from rival divisions launched a mentorship mini-program for recent graduates. Even the monthly company happy hour, once an awkward formality, had become an event people looked forward to. Sometimes, Olivia noticed, with people lingering long after. The officially scheduled hour ended. One particular Friday brought a surprise. A junior colleague, Samira, stopped by Olivia's open door, holding a small plant in a ceramic pot. "For your window," she said, a little shyly. "A thank you, for making this place somewhere I want to stay." Olivia accepted the gesture with quiet gratitude. Moments like these, small and private, felt more meaningful than praise from above. Near the end of June, Olivia was invited to address all of Alteratech in a town hall, even those working remotely or abroad. Standing before a large screen filled with dozens of faces, her voice steady, she reflected on the journey. Real change isn't quick or easy, but each of us shapes this place by what we challenge, what we accept, and how we support each other. I don't have every answer. What I know is that courage is a team sport, and progress a relay, each of us taking a turn to carry the baton forward. Her words were met with applause, some loud, some hesitant, but all real. Afterwards, messages trickled into her inbox. Thanks for speaking honestly, for not letting tough times define the future, for making space for other voices. As she wrapped up her work one golden evening, Olivia paused by the window, the city below glowing in the late daylight. She felt the quiet ease of hard-fought peace. No triumphal music, just the knowledge that she had helped usher in something lasting. Alteratech was not perfect, nor was her work done. But as she watched the soft glow dance along the skyline, Olivia knew this new light in the office would keep growing, as long as one person was willing to keep the windows open.